CMA Church here in Ellensburg. In June, it'll be 25 years. And I'm married. My wife, Shalise, and two kids. Linnea, she's a junior at Central Washington University. And then my son, Curtis, he's a junior in high school, but all his classes, he's doing running start. So he's at Central too. But I'm just feeling really honored and thankful for the opportunity to share with you guys. I had a lot of fun just preparing. In fact, yeah, just thinking through back over 30 years of ministry, and it's like, wow, I can't believe it. And some days felt like eternity, but overall it feels like it's gone really quick. So yeah, just thankful for the opportunity to share, and wish I had the opportunity to hear more of your stories. But love youth workers and children's workers, and just thank you for the way you guys serve. So my prayer is that I just be able to encourage you in some way today.
Thank you so much, Dwayne. When we chatted, was it last week? I felt like he's just giving us this precious gift. And so just my prayer for you guys is that you just receive these things and ask the Lord, like, what could it mean for me? What can this, how can God use the things that Dwayne's learned in your lives? So yeah, with that, let's get going.
Rock and roll. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, why don't I pray
Yeah.
first? Father, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for each person here and the unique call and giftedness that you've placed in each one of their lives. I thank you for just the years of ministry and the lessons that I've learned and things that you've entrusted into my life. And just pray that as I share that, I don't know, that you would speak to each one in a personal way, that there would be something that they could take away from our time together that would help them nourish their own soul and care for themselves as they care for others. So we just acknowledge your presence with us and pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, I'm going to dive in. I feel like what I'm sharing with you, I kind of categorized it into 4 areas. And I think a lot of this, it's just basic. It's just things that we need to be reminded of. And I think in ministry, there are so many demands. So there's just this natural drift. And part of my heart, I think it's why I'm thankful for the opportunity. Almost everyone that I started off in youth ministry is no longer in ministry. I was thinking of all the pastors that I worked with here in the church when I first started. None of them are pastoring anymore. So it's a hard calling. There's no way around it. And so for us to be able to take care of ourselves is really, really important. And so the way I kind of broke up all these entrustments, I would call them, is into 4 areas. First is your relationship with God. The next would be your family relationships. The third would be your own personal health. And then just some practical ministry tips. So feel free at any point to interrupt, jump in if you have questions. At the end, I'll kind of go through these, and at the end, just have a Q&A time if you have more questions. So my daughter last night, Linnea, she is doing online classes, and she said that in one of her classes last night, her professor had a guest speaker that came in and spoke 2 hours nonstop. And she said it was good at first, but then it just got too long. And so I felt like that was a good reminder for me that don't talk for a whole hour, Dwayne, and bore these guys to death. So feel free to interject. But I want to start with just self-care begins with just your relationship with God. And I don't want to spend a lot of time because I think that's obvious, but there is this natural drift. And so my favorite ministry passage has always been John 15, verses 5-8. It's familiar, but I'll read it anyway. I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not remain in me, he is like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be given you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. And so when I think back of when I first started off in ministry, that was one of the most exciting seasons, really in life and ministry. And I think part of it was because I was getting so connected to the vine, and a natural uh, outcome of that is we begin producing fruit. And to me, there's nothing else that compares being a good branch connected to the vine that bears fruit. I think the thing that I've learned over the years, and the caution is to stay connected to the vine. And sometimes our focus shifts from the vine to producing the fruit. And we always have to come back to staying connected with the vine. That's the source of where the fruit comes from. And so I think a lot of times what happens is, if we're not careful, it's when you begin producing fruit, staying humble. And I think it's subtle. Sometimes it can happen that you start producing fruit, and it can be this subtle thing of, God's sure lucky to have a branch like me. Look at all the fruit. And when you start approaching ministry that way, watch out, because that's when the pruners come out, and God starts lopping off some branches to be reminded it's him that produces the fruit. The other thing that's key in that is it says, apart from me, you can do nothing. And so I think the longer that you're in ministry, you have to be careful, because you can become more confident in your own skill and rely less on God. And so to stay connected to the vine, if you don't remain in me, in Jesus, he says, apart from me, you can do nothing. So one of the pastors I work for, he used an analogy of it's like being on a treadmill. You're exerting all this energy, effort, but you're getting nowhere, and it's not producing the things that really matter to God. So staying connected with him, so that you can continue to bear fruit and do it for his glory. So anyway, that's one of my favorite ministry passages. I remember when I went through my ordination interview, after the interview, and I was just thankful to pass and be ordained, they took me out to lunch. And I remember one of the pastors who I just had a lot of respect and admired. He said, Dwayne, every Christ follower has a target on their back, but every pastor has a bullseye. And that just stuck with me. And it's true, because we have great influence as leaders. The enemy knows that, and he's going to attack us. And so I think it's just being very aware that we're in a spiritual battle, and making sure you're arming yourself with the armor of God, and just putting those guardrails in place that keep you from going off the edge. One of the guardrails that I wanted to share with you that's been important for me for the last 30 years is I've always had at least a person holding me accountable to questions that I came up with 30 years ago. And these are the areas where I feel most vulnerable to the enemy's attacks. 30 years ago when I wrote these, there was only 8. I've had to add one question, the 9th. And the one I had to add was, are you taking care of yourself physically by exercising and eating healthy? Because when I was 20, it didn't really matter, but now it does. But here are just my accountability questions. Are you spending time alone with God, studying God's word, and spending time in prayer each day? Are you being the spiritual leader in your marriage and loving Shalice like Christ loves the church? Is your thought life pure? Are you resisting sexual temptation? Are there any areas of your life where you're not walking in total obedience to God? Is there someone you need to forgive or seek forgiveness from? Do you confess your sins to God and accept his forgiveness? Are you being a faithful steward of the time and money God has entrusted into your care? What area of your life do you feel most vulnerable to the enemy's attacks? And then finally, have you lied about any of the previous questions, or is there something you have avoided telling me? So these are the questions I go over with someone that I've gone over with someone almost every week for the last 30 years. And I feel like they're the guardrails that keep me. I make myself vulnerable to other people. And one of the things I want to let you know is Shalise has thanked me over and over again. She feels like she can ask me any question about anything, but she's told me I don't feel like I have to, because you made yourself accountable to other men in your life, and they're probably harder on you than I would be. So she has appreciated that. It doesn't mean that we don't have conversations about these things, um, but again, just making myself accountable to other people. One of the things that I was thinking of when I served on our district board for almost 10 years. And one of the hardest things that I had to do or be a part of serving on our district board is at those meetings when we would have to have hard conversations about people, pastors, ministry leaders who had to resign because of moral failure or some kind of hidden sin. And the one thing that I observed that almost all of these people who had to step out of ministry had in common. There's two things. One, they had isolated themselves from other people. They had isolated themselves from other people. And then in talking, one of the things that I kept hearing over and over again is they had an attitude of that would never happen. I'd never do that. That would never happen to me. And the problem is, if you think that it will never happen to you or that it never could happen to you, watch out. Because part of it, you're not guarding against it. You've left your guard down and you'll be attacked. So making sure that you know that we're all vulnerable to the enemy's attacks. And so finally, one of my regular prayers every day, it's the same. God, fill me with your spirit. Help me to walk in your spirit and live out the fruits of your spirit, because I need love. I need joy. Especially right now in this season, I keep sharing it with others. I need patience. I need self-control, because some of you were talking beforehand in this season of COVID and everything else going on. People are really struggling and just need to be encouraged to walk in the Spirit. So my first question for you under this area of connecting with God is, how well are you connecting to the vine right now? That's critical, that we can't give something that we aren't receiving ourselves. So I'll pause for a sec. Any comments, questions before I move on? Okay, I'm going to keep going. Next thing is family. And I think one of the things that has benefited our marriage the most is just having a weekly date night. That Shalise and I have always had a weekly date night, and that's not always easy. We've had to be super creative. When the kids were younger, it was especially hard. But someone's talked about the law of entropy, and that anything that gives off energy needs to take in energy or it eventually dies. And so part of it for Shalise and I, having a regular date night, that interjects energy into our relationship, and it helps us balance all the hardships that you go through in life. So just being intentional with your spouse. One thing, thinking about the years of ministry, Shalise has been incredible, super supportive. She makes tons of sacrifices. I couldn't do what I do without her support and encouragement. The main thing that she does not like or appreciate that creates conflict is surprises. It's last minute stuff. And so usually our conflict is centered around two things: time and money. And so another thing that we've done that's very intentional is on Sunday night, we always usually go over the calendar for the next week. So I can just say, here's what I got going that's church related. She can share what's going on with the kids, that we can sync our calendars together. And then also just even with our finances, being in ministry, finances tend to be an issue because we don't always get paid a lot. So things are tight. And so the other thing is, in our marriage, I've always been the one that pay the bills. And she's fine with that. But sometimes I have a better sense of how we're doing financially than she does. And so for her, she doesn't want to manage our finances, but she just wants a sense of how are we doing. So talking about time and money has helped us avoid a lot of conflict, honestly. The other thing that's stuck with me, one of my mentors, he actually served in Hannah's role when I was first starting off in youth ministry, but he's still someone that coaches me as a mentor to me. And he just retired. He just turned 70. And so I'm always asking him questions, but I'm like, what's one of your biggest regrets, you know, serving in ministry for your entire career? And he said, the biggest thing is the church got the apple and my family got the core. And I'm like, ugh. Part of it, that was true with growing up. My dad's a pastor, and it's what created tension between my mom and my dad. Mom was always fighting for our family. Dad was always trying to manage all the things for the church, and that's where the tension was. And honestly, I grew up saying I'd never be in ministry, that I would never be a pastor, and God chuckled, and here I am. But making your family a priority, and just to remind you, that's your first ministry. There will be a point where you won't be serving in the church, the context that you're in right now, but you'll still have your family. And so I've seen so many people that I've worked with and people in our district who didn't have healthy boundaries. They gave the church everything, gave their family the leftovers. They lost their family, and in losing their family, they lost their ministry. So there's a tension there. Again, my mentor, he says, it's not a problem to be fixed. It's a tension to be managed. And so just being intentional with your family, maintaining healthy boundaries. My dad has told me many times that I've done a much better job keeping boundaries in ministry than he did. And it's true. I remember growing up as a kid, anytime we'd have family dinner and the phone would ring, my dad would answer. And so that's the last, we'd finished dinner and he's still on the phone. So I just think there's times where you need to establish healthy boundaries. As a care pastor now too, I'm bombarded with people who are in crisis. And a lot of times I find that depending on what their crisis is, a lot of times I'll ask them if I can talk the next morning. And by the next morning, they've resolved it. So it's making sure that other people's crisis don't create a crisis for me or for you. We have families, and so we just need to maintain those boundaries. One thing that's been fun and helpful, just even with my own kids, it's involving them in ministry when I can, that kind of taps into their unique giftedness. So just for instance, a week ago, I did a baptism down at the river, and it was awesome. It was almost eerie because you went down to the river, but there was so much smoke, you couldn't see anything. So the pictures almost look eerie, but there was just a dozen family members, and I had someone videotape it. When I got home, my daughter loves putting these videos together, and I asked her, would you put a video together for this family? And I paid her to do it, and I gave it to this family, and they loved it. And so then the next thing I know, they wrote my daughter a card and put a $50 bill in the card for her. So I'm like, I want money back. Not really. I let her keep both, but it made her feel good. But it was a way of involving her in the church in a way that utilizes her gifts. Another thing that I love doing with Curtis, Curtis is super smart, my son. Anytime I preach, I go over my message with my son. And he is so helpful, his insight. And I'm like, if a junior in high school doesn't understand what I'm talking about, then no one will. So it's just been a fun way, and he's become my biggest encourager. After I preach, almost always he's the first to come up and say, Dwayne, Dad, you did such an awesome job. And he's starting to feel the call into full-time ministry. And so it's just a neat way for us to have neat conversations and involve him. So a couple more things that relates to family. Know what season you're in and adjust accordingly. When you have young kids, you have to make an adjustment. So when I was first starting off in ministry, I wasn't married. I was able to pour everything I had into youth ministry. And then when I met Shalice and when we were engaged and we were getting married, my dad pulled me aside and he said, hey, Dwayne, what you're doing is awesome. But if you continue to do things the way you are now after you get married, a good thing's going to become a bad thing. In other words, you need to adjust, especially in your first year of marriage, and establish a new rhythm. And so I am so thankful for that. Then my dad had the same conversation with me again years later, when right before Linnea was born. And same conversation. Dwayne, what you're doing is good, but if you keep doing things at the same pace you're doing now, once you have kids, a good thing's going to become a bad thing. So you need to adjust. So just knowing what season you're in, and I think that was helpful too, knowing what to say yes to and what to say no to. I felt like there was always opportunities, things I was being asked to do. And someone once wisely told me, Dwayne, if the opportunities are there now, they'll be there again later. But this isn't the right time to say yes, because you have more important needs that you have to balance. So there's God, there's family. And my second question is, how healthy are your relationships with family members right now? Just being intentional. I'll give you one last example. Tomorrow, I'm taking a week of vacation, and my parents are coming over tonight. They're both in their 80s. My brother just bought a home in California, so I'm driving them down to California. I didn't want them to go in the airport, get on an airplane because of COVID. And I'm like, this isn't the best time of year for me to be taking a week off. But I'm like, I will never regret this next week of spending with my parents. And they are so excited. They're giddy even. So looking forward to that. So there's family. The third area is personal health. That we all have limits. That and if we're not careful, again, because of all the demands, resentment can set in. And that has been true in my case. And so even I was going through the Academy of Spiritual Formation, and I was really struggling probably like 4 years ago and feeling resentment towards the ministry. Like, I'm just not having fun. I just want to quit. Do something else. And it was through the academy that I realized that I wasn't really in caring for everyone else. I wasn't caring for myself, and I wasn't having fun. So I quit all lunch appointments, and I joined Wellness Hour, which is 2 blocks down the street up at Central. I love pickleball. And so now every noon hour, I go up and play pickleball, and I have so much fun. And so it's just been good. I'm eating less, I'm exercising more, and I'm just having a break during the day, which has been fun. Finding things that you enjoy doing. Another thing I love doing is fantasy football. But that's highly addictive, and so I'm also having to go to Celebrate Recovery. But I love fantasy football. So finding things that you enjoy doing. A gift that the church has given our staff is 1 day a month. They've given us a Sabbath day just to go and be alone with God. And so we've had to be intentional about scheduling those. If you don't schedule them, they don't happen. But those Sabbath days have become precious. One of the things that have happened over those Sabbath days is I go and connect with God, and God redirects my path. And it's almost in taking a pause, God over and over again says, hey, Dwayne, you're spending all this time and energy in this, going in this direction. That's not where I want you to go. And yet you're neglecting this. And so it recalibrates me every time I take a Sabbath day. It's just been life-giving. Also a blessing of the church. Every 7 years, we get a sabbatical. It used to be 3 months, which was huge. Now it's 7 weeks. But I'll tell you, I've had 3 sabbaticals now, and I know some people have had none. But if I hadn't been given the gift of those sabbaticals, I know I wouldn't still be here. So that's just something, I know that people have different ideas about that, but each time I've come back healthier, and healthy pastors lead healthy churches. Sabbatical. Vacation, being very intentional with vacation time. Sometimes people boast that, I never take a vacation. And I'm like, then I'm concerned for you and your family. You need time off, and your wife, your husband, your kids, you need to have that time together, having fun. I think friendships are key. I meet with people regularly. Every Wednesday morning is when I meet after our men's small groups, meet with my accountability partner to go over my questions. Every Thursday, I have lunch. I've had lunch every Thursday with someone for the last 10 years. And those are just life-giving relationships. My coach, my mentor, having key people that you can trust and really unpack. And in ministry, you have to be discerning of who those people are. You can't share everything with everyone. Hannah's dad, Mark Green, was one of those people for me. Still just a very close friend, but those are life-giving to me, that God has used those friendships to provide guardrails for me, again, from going off the edge. The other thing that has been really life-giving for me, what I call missional living, and it's serving outside the church. And so they even work that, at my request, into my job description, so that it's part of my job serving outside of the church. So 10 years ago, before I became a pastor, I wanted to be a police officer. 10 years ago, I became a reserve police officer for the Ellensburg Police Department. And then that evolved into my primary role has been being the school resource officer at the middle school. And I love it. I have loved it, the way it's connected me with kids, teachers, parents, people in the community that would never come to our church. The other thing is, as a result of that, I've been asked to be our department chaplain. And so I could tell you story after story of just tragedies that I've been a part of. A huge part of being a chaplain is doing death notifications. And I've done lots of funerals, services, but it's connected me with people in the community that had no connection to God or the church. And as a result of meeting them in their darkest hour, they now attend our church. It's been so life-giving for me. And part of it, what's helped me is, even as a pastor, it's made me a better pastor, because it's helped me learn how to have conversations with people outside the church. So there's personal health. Those are just a few things. And the question that I would have for you, it's based on Proverbs 14:4. This is the verse. It says this: where there are no oxen, the manger is empty, but from the strength of an ox comes an abundant harvest. So my interpretation of that verse is, when you have an ox, there's poo in the manger. But the benefit of having an ox is you get this abundant harvest. And so my crude analogy, some have related that to marriage. And what I'm relating it to is the church. The church is an ox, and with the church, there comes lots of poo. But also with the church, there comes this abundant harvest. And so the question is, how is your positive to poo ratio? Because if all you're dealing with is poo, you want to kill the ox or get rid of it. And so you have to find the balance between the positive and poo as it relates to ministry. Okay, so sorry for the crude analogy. I got one more area. I'm talking quick. Thanks for listening. Last thing, just practical ministry tips. These are just things that I learned over the years. Maximize your gifts. Know who you are and who you aren't. For me, I'm a shepherd. So just yesterday, I was asked to speak at a men's retreat, and I said no. I love going to this men's retreat. I, every year, fill a van of hurting guys who are isolated, disconnected. I bring them to the retreat, and I'm able to shepherd them. I would much rather shepherd than teach. And so I can do the teaching, but I really want to maximize my gift. And that's how I feel like I can do it. So it's just nice when you really get to that place of understanding who you are and who you're not. Invite key leaders to be a part of your ministry. And by this, I mean, this was great advice to me early on. Invite an elder or a governing board member, leaders in your ministry context, to be a part of your ministry. And part of it is, especially as associate pastors, in time, eventually there's a conflict between an associate and the senior pastor. And the senior pastor has had the ear of the elders, the governing board members. Associate pastors have not. So when a hard decision has to be made, usually it's the associate pastor that has to leave. The advice I was given, invite them in. So in my very first ministry, that's what I did, where we had like 4 elders, governing board members who became a part of my youth ministry. And sure enough, in time, there was conflict between me and the lead pastor. The youth ministry grew so quick and so fast. And I think he became very threatened and insecure by it. And at one of our meetings, he was frustrated and said, I'll never forget, he said, youth ministry is just a bunch of hype. And it was a bittersweet moment for me because that was hurtful and it wasn't true. But I didn't need to say a word. It's the people that were a part of my ministry that each one spoke to it and said, that's not true. And they gave examples. So again, invite key leaders to be a part of your ministry. Don't avoid conflict. There is so much conflict in what we do. And I tend to lean more on being a peace faker rather than dealing with conflict and being a peacemaker. But I've learned to not avoid it and deal with it right away. I would just rather approach it than ignore it because it doesn't go away. And to minimize the inner turmoil that comes with conflict. Now, one of the things I said too, I've heard of this 1 in 12 principle. When you think of Jesus and his disciples, there was one of the 12 who was disloyal. And what I call them is dart throwers. People that are there just to, it's not even, I've learned not to take things so personal because a lot of it's more positional. It's our position of leadership. And so people attack us. But with that, we have, at the time we had about 1,200 people attending church, and our lead pastor, his mom came to visit. And I was just sharing that, man, some people just exhaust me, people in the church who are just dart throwers. And she's the one that shared the 1 in 12 principle. So she's like, if that's true, a church the size of 1,200, you can assume, that there's probably 100 people that are stirring up problems. And that's just always stuck with me. So you kind of have to manage that the best you can. So don't avoid conflict. Ask good questions and be a good listener. Don't miss the opportunities to speak the truth in love, and do it with gentleness and respect. And by that, God has given us the position, the place to ask people the hard questions that no one else can get away with asking. But sometimes we shy away from asking the hard questions. And so when I meet with people almost every day. And one of the things that I share with them is, I feel honored that they would take the mask off. There's a picture behind me that I had someone drew, because that's kind of how people come into my office. They take the mask off and they reveal their pain. And my promise to them is I'm going to speak the truth in love and do it with gentleness and respect. But don't miss out on the opportunities to have the hard conversation. I'll give you one example that's kind of extreme, but there was one guy that his life and his marriage was just a mess. And he comes to this point, he's like, Dwayne, what am I missing? And I'm like, ooh, are you wanting me to answer that? And he's like, yeah, I do, but I didn't want to, because what I had to tell him was going to be hard. That there's obviously some self-centeredness, some pride issues going on in your life. And so I shared those things with him, dead silent, didn't say anything, left with that. The next day he comes back crying, thanking me. And it was like I spoke the truth, but then he had to wrestle with the Holy Spirit. And then, and this was a person I didn't even know. He didn't even live in this state. And then it was about a month later, he wrote me a letter thanking me about how that conversation changed his life, changed his ministry, changed his marriage. And he included a check for $5,000. So I have been confronting people ever since, hoping for another check, but it hasn't come. Anyway, that's kind of an extreme example, but there's a lot more stories. Another thing, have clear goals, chart your course. Take the time, whether it's, if you can devote 2-3 days at the beginning of the ministry year just to get alone and plan out the whole year. And I would do that every year, map out the course. I would share it with my student leaders, get their input. It would totally change things again. Then I would go with their recommendations to my adult leaders, and we would tweak it again. And then I would involve parents in the decision making, and it would tweak again. But then I would have a plan for the whole year. And now it's just a matter of executing it. And everyone felt like they had some ownership in it because it's something that we did together. So I am so thankful that I learned that early on in ministry. And one thing that I've learned from a lot of youth pastors in particular is they don't think ahead. They're just going from one week to the next to the next. And you will be so thankful if you devote the time to really think through, what do you want to accomplish in a year, and work towards that and get the input from other people. Be a lifelong learner, continue to grow in your leadership. Global Leadership Summit, they say over and over again, everyone gets better when the leader gets better. And it's true. So a lot of leaders at some point in their ministry, they'll get lazy, they'll get content, and they just kind of plateau and go in decline. So always maintain a teachable spirit. Team chemistry is important. And even for myself, the thing that I wrote is, I want to work with the people that God has brought together in our staff. And, there's been lots of different seasons. One bad apple can really, you've heard the expression, can spoil the barrel. I don't want to be that bad apple. And so part of it is, God help me just to be a life giver on our staff. And so one question is, will people cheer or will they cry when you leave? I want people to cry for the right reasons. Another thing, develop the potential in your students. we can see potential in students that they can't see in themselves. And so even for me, the joy now of being in ministry for so long is seeing people that God has brought into my life that I've been able to pour into, and now that they're leading. I can't tell you how full it makes my heart seeing Hannah serve and her role. And just being a part of our church and our ministry, that makes my heart happy. So invest in your students and pour into their potential. You'll never regret that. Finally, there's blessing and persevering. In the 25 years, there's been so many times I've wanted to quit, but I have not felt the release of God, and I've persevered. And I just want to let you know, don't leave, don't quit when things get tough. That's when leadership matters the most. Now, it's one thing if God's released you from your ministry, that's one thing. But I've seen too many people that have quit when the pressure's gotten too great. And my experience has been every time I've persevered, I've been resilient in that. There's been this unexpected blessing that I would have missed out on if I wouldn't have persevered. That's happened so many times. So don't bail out. It's the whole don't grow weary in doing good. Persevere. I know it's hard, and you have a gift in each other where you can support and encourage one another. And then just finally finish well. So many pastors do not finish well, and it's amazing. That's always been my prayer. I'm so thankful that my dad finished well in ministry. But I've seen so many of my colleagues, people that I've worked with, who did not finish well, and it almost negates any fruitful ministry that they had prior to that. So finish well. So the last question is, what's an area of ministry that you would like to grow in right now? That's just something good to think about. What's an area that would benefit me and benefit people in my ministry if I took time to grow? So I am sorry I've talked fast and furious. I'm going to shut up now and open it up if anyone has any questions, comments about whatever.
I do.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Dwayne. My name's Ricky. My question comes from, let's see, number 3, personal health. And you said you have a work-sanctioned Sabbath.
Yeah.
We have something similar here. I'm just curious what you do specifically, if you don't mind sharing, on that on that Sabbath.
Yeah.
Day.
My favorite thing to do is about half an hour from here is Roslyn. It's a little town, and they have a bookstore. And the reason why I like going up there is I can't go anywhere in Ellensburg and not see people that I don't, everywhere I go. So I can go up there and I still see people I know, but there's just a little place where I can go and hide. They have Wi-Fi, they have good coffee and good snacks. And a lot of times what I'm doing, I'll spend extended time reading my Bible. I will a lot of times listen to some different messages, podcasts. I'll do some reading. And then there's just some great places to go walk and pray. So it's really one of the things that I've learned to is to don't try to over plan and be flexible. Because sometimes I've set myself up for failure trying to plan too much. And it really is just a time to slow down, get perspective, to pray, to read the word, and just meet with God. And it's just become a beautiful thing for me. So that's primarily what it looks like for me.
Yeah, I have a question. So this has happened to me at past churches where either it's like my supervising pastor or just other pastors on staff have self-admitted that they're really terrible with like work-life boundaries.
Yeah.
And then I feel kind of like a jerk for rigidly enforcing mine, especially as like the younger pastor.
Yep.
and being like, nope, I'm not going to go to that. Like, and I also don't have a family. And so I think in church culture, it's easier to justify rigid boundaries when you can kind of use your family as like a, you know, oh, my kids need me. So how do you deal with that tension? Like, and it's not that, like, the pastors were great. Like, you know, they're wonderful supervisors and even would self-admit, like, I'm terrible at boundaries. But as the younger pastor, it's really hard to navigate that tension. And then you just do kind of feel like a jerk.
Yeah.
Or feel guilty. Like, how do you navigate that?
It's a great question. And you're right. You know, some of the worst Sabbath keepers are pastors.
Yeah.
They are. My first boss that I worked for in this church, he was a workaholic. He'd work literally 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
He expected all his staff to work 65 hours a week. I had to fill out a weekly sheet showing that I got my 65 hours in and write down every person I met with, why. I mean, he was a major micromanager. It was not healthy. But what I learned, and sometimes I felt like a jerk, like I feel like a jerk that I'm keeping boundaries and saying no.
Right.
In fact, it's interesting. Someone yesterday got upset with me because they had expectations about something I should be doing that it's like, I'm not doing that. So we need to have a conversation today. But I think part of it, it's being intentional. And so what I've laid out is every week, I have a weekly schedule that doesn't change much. So one of the things that I've done is built in margin. There's a book called Margin that's written by a Christian doctor that's good, but creating blocks of time into my schedule of just margin to leave room for the unexpected. Because a lot of times we don't leave margin, we fill our schedules and then things come up. And so then we're having to do stuff at night. So leaving margin, but it's being very intentional. And with my job description, I have my job description blocked out on a weekly schedule so that I can accomplish my job. And it leaves very little time for extra stuff. And so once those spots are filled, then it's like, well, then we have to meet. I'm not available this week, but I can meet next week. Or sometimes, literally now when people want to meet, a lot of times I can't meet for 2 or 3 weeks. But I can help them connect with other people. So I'm not responsible for other people's boundaryless lives. The one thing that I know, though, is no one's going to take care of my family except for me. And even for me, and that's what I'm accountable for. So the thing, and part of it, sometimes it's hard too, because you compare and it's like they're doing so much, they're producing so much fruit. And if I'd only work more, I'd produce more fruit too. That's a trap. And the thing is, the people that gave too much to the ministry, they're the ones who are no longer in ministry and whose marriages have blown up. So I think it's just maintaining a sustainable pace that you think I can maintain this schedule for the next 10 years.
Right. Okay.
I think part of it too is when people, if you can give a rationale of why you're doing certain things and not. Doug Fields wrote a great book, When Saying No is Better Than Saying Yes. And it's all about that. Swenson, or Scazzaro, he's written a lot of books, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. He wrote, or maybe it's his wife wrote a book called, I'm trying to find it. It's something like I Quit or I Quit the Church. So he came home one day and his wife said, I'm done. I'm done going to church, because she got so sick of no boundaries. So it's first of all, if you're making God priority and family priority, that helps put everything into its right context.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Dwayne. I loved all the stuff you're talking about. I'm wondering, you're like, 30 years in almost, looking back, and I'm guessing like you're giving us things that accumulated in your life over time, right? Like
Yeah.
you didn't start, which is so helpful. But you like, and I would say some of us probably have different forms of different things that you have mentioned, in our life already. But I've already, just recognized a few. It's like, yeah, I need to. That would be a good addition in my life for self-care and for my family. So I wonder, like, it can be overwhelming to think like, okay, I need a date night this week, and I got to find a person I can be completely vulnerable with, and then I need to get these questions, just like
Yeah.
you said a lot of things. So I'm wondering, like, not that we're all going to be able to start in the same place, but just maybe a little wisdom on how to not burn out trying to
Yep.
add all the self-care.
Exactly. Great question. And this is the conversation I have almost at the end of every men's retreat. Because again, we're bombarded with all these things we do. And by the end of it, you feel deflated. Like, I am such a creep. I'm such a bad Christ follower, pastor, husband, wife, usually wives don't say that at a men's retreat, but there is a book that's been helpful that helped me a lot. It's called The 2 Degree Difference. And so what I encourage the men at a retreat is just take one thing from today and implement it. And the whole gist of this book, The 2 Degree Difference, is if you make one little correction or take action in one simple way today as a result of this conversation, make a 2-degree adjustment in a week, in a month, in a year, you're going to be at such a different place because of one thing you did different. So just implement one thing. And these weren't things, again, I'm 30 years in, so I've been able to implement these things over the course of time. But there's probably one thing that you can implement, hopefully as a result of just our time together today, that in a year from now, you're going to look back and say, my life is different because of this one little tweak I made a year ago. Yeah. So don't overburden yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
I have a question, Dwayne. First off, the thing about being reactionary and not planning ahead, like I'm guilty of that. I'm not a long-term planner. It's just not been part of my DNA. There are much better people who are better at that. I'm doing my best to go in that direction. But life-wise, I recently got married last year, and then because we like to hurry things up, we had a baby as well. So all that transition stuff that you were talking about those seasons,
Yep.
from one thing to another, how did you and your, or even when you were going from single to married and married with children, like how did you navigate that?
Yeah. Great question. I'm going to share a Bible verse with you that I took to heart that was huge for me because I was working in the church. I resigned from the church to go back to school, and Shalise and I got married. So the verse that I took to heart, and I share this when I do pre-marriage counseling, it's Deuteronomy 24:5. It says, if a man has recently married, he must not be sent to war or have any other duty laid on him. For 1 year, he is to be free to stay at home and bring happiness to the wife he has married. Wives love that verse. And so what I took that to heart, I'd always been involved in ministry. After Shalise and I got married, I took a year off of leading the youth ministry. This may be extreme, but I took a year off from leading the youth ministry. And just, I took that heart, like in our first year of marriage, I'm just going to make it my goal to make Shalise happy. And you know what? That year, it established rhythms and patterns that have continued today, like having a date night. Now, I do tons of counseling. When I meet with couples, what's interesting for me is couples that I meet with, I'm always intrigued with a couple that's been married for 25 years and they're having conflict, and it all can be traced back to the first year that they didn't establish healthy rhythms and patterns. And so for me, it's like, yeah, there's things you have to do. You have to work, you have to go to school. So for me, it's just eliminating, especially in your first year of marriage, things that you don't have to do so that you can focus on each other. And I think even with kids, being very intentional about what that looks like. One of the things I'm so grateful that I did with both my kids is when my kids, up until they got in junior high, every week I would take my kids on a date. They got to pick where we'd go. They always picked the same place. It was always Baskin Robbins, which I had no problem with. But looking back, I would never, ever trade those dates, because we'd have conversations licking ice cream cones that we would have never had at home, and just the way it connected with us. If we had more time, I would tell you sweet stories of things that I've done specifically intentional with my son Curtis, reading books together. We read a book called Every Young Man's Battle, just about sexual purity. And man, the conversations that we've had have been so life-giving. I wouldn't trade for anything. So really what it comes down to is just being very intentional and purposeful, and in planning not just what happens with your family, but what happens with your ministry, because they're so interconnected. And even going back to planning and charting your course for your ministry, I'll just encourage you, you don't need to do it for a whole year, just even doing it for a whole month. But one of the things that I really, when I plan for a whole year and have a theme that I'm going with or different things, by the time I'm preaching on something or teaching the students, I have so many analogies or illustrations or ideas. But the times that I'm going from week to week, I'm scrambling. I'm like, man, I can't think of any illustration, or this just sucks, or I'm able to involve other people when I know, like, we're going to talk about this, and this person in church would be perfect to come in as a guest speaker and address this topic. So sorry, Wynn, I was kind of all over the place on that.
No, that's fine. That works. That works. What was that reference again? Deuteronomy 12?
Deuteronomy 24:5. The other thing, there's a great exercise that I've done with my wife and kids. It's called the wish list, and it's asking them to write down 3 things that they wish as it pertains to me. And it's awesome because a lot of times it's a window into things that I could be doing that they want that I'm just not aware of. And once I know what their wish is, and I preface it, it's a wish, so don't expect it to happen. But once I know that that's a wish, I want to do it. And it's been insightful, especially with Shalise. I mean, she shared things that I'm like, oh my goodness, Dwayne, you're so dense. That just seems so easy to do. But it's just being aware, because I don't think that way. So.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Yeah.
So good. Thank you. We've gone over time. I know some had to jet, but if anyone has like one burning question, we can ask it. Otherwise, I know we have other things to do. We good? Dwayne, thank you so much.
Thank you. This was fun for me.
It was.
Hopefully you don't go home to your children and say, kids, today I had to spend an hour listening to this guy last night. No.
Well worth the time. It's so good. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Cool. Well, yeah, we'll see you guys same place, same time in a month with Aaron Wynn talking about the gospel with students. And I'll put a video and email you more details. But Aaron shared his testimony with me a year ago, and he's a youth pastor. And I was like, oh, I need you to share with other people. So yeah, look forward to that. So again, Dwayne, thank you.
You're welcome.
I sometimes when you're talking, I feel like I'm a little kid again. Well, in junior high or high school, because I'm like sitting at your feet or something. That sounds so weird because I didn't ever actually sit at your feet. But
Thanks for clarifying that.
yeah. All right, friends. Bless you today. Yeah, let me know if you guys need anything. Love you guys.
Good to see you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.